Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening. You are listening to The Shift. I am your host, Doug McKenty. This is the 13th episode of The Shift, recorded on September 13th, 2017. If you like what you're listening to, please think about becoming a patron on my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to find out more information, go to my Facebook page at The Shift with Doug McKenty. Join the conversation on Twitter at DMcKenty, or check out all of my archives and other information at the website theshiftnow.com. My guests on the program today are Ellen Brown and Walt McRee of the Public Banking Institute. Ellen is the author of 12 books, including The Groundbreaking Web of Debt, as well as The Public Bank Solution, which describes the inner workings of the current privately owned Federal Reserve System, the inevitable out-of-control debt spiral that results from it, and how publicly owned and operated banks can reverse the cycle, providing prosperity on a local, state, and federal level. She is the founder of the Public Banking Institute and is currently serving as its president emeritus and senior advisor and chairman of the board. Walt McRee served on the board of PBI for the last 2.5 years, working tirelessly to educate the public about the benefits of public banking. He recently left PBI to form the Public Banking Associates, an association designed to connect elected officials with banking experts in order to make a clear financial and legal case for public banking. Together, Ellen and Walt produced the radio show, It's Our Money, and today I would like to welcome them to this program. Thank you both for helping to make the shift. How's it going?
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Good to see you.
Likewise. I guess I should tell everyone that we have worked together here in Mendocino County. We tried to, last year, turn Mendocino County into a charter county and put a public bank in the charter. I helped run that campaign. Walt came out and educated us and tried to help educate the community about that. Ellen's been out here as well. So we've had a pretty active public banking coalition going here for a few years. For me personally, it seems like a really viable solution to a lot of the financial problems and economic problems that we have. But for the two of you, why don't you just tell us what's been going on with the Public Banking Institute? Give us a little bit about your past, why and how you got into public banking. Ellen, do you want to start?
Well, Walt can start on what's going on because that's been his job for the last...
Sure.
He knows all the details of what's going on, but I can certainly tell you about probably PBI. Go ahead.
Walt?
Oh, all right. It has been a massive, really a very energized movement in the last couple of years. A lot of momentum. We have several dozen cities, counties, and states around the country, a couple of dozen, I should say, that are actively engaged in pursuing a public bank for their city, county, or state. The people have gotten wind of the logic, and they've also gotten tired of the reality of that the financial system is not in their control. They have very little power. They're losing more and more power as their debt grows and grows, both personally and also on a municipal level and a state level. So the timing is right for public banking. It's still a lesser known, I mean, it's not a household word as yet. People, of course, easily misunderstand what a public bank might be, but we're, of course, referring to publicly owned banks. I think, though, it's such a logical, commonsensical option, the idea of keeping your money at home and investing in yourself instead of sending it to Wall Street and letting them invest it in Brunei and silly paper around the world, while our neighborhoods are deteriorating and the prospects are not getting any better. We see crises like the weather of the past couple of weeks as harbingers of situations that we're going to have to be dealing with, not just socially, but financially as well. And public banks certainly, we think, have a role in the future there to play as well. So we have cities that are actively on board in pursuing it. Seattle being one. We have a strong interest in Tacoma. Up at Portland is also on the on the horizon. Many cities in California, as you well know, Santa Rosa, San Francisco has had it on the table. Los Angeles now has it before the city council president and others really around California, a number of initiatives there. In Arizona, there's a state bill. In New Mexico, there's Albuquerque and Santa Fe. Santa Fe furthest along, further than anyone, having a task force set up by the city council there. And then moving east You have Philadelphia, which is looking at this. The state of Pennsylvania, Massachusetts is looking at creating an infrastructure bank. There's a bill in New Hampshire. Maine is considered one. Vermont, you get the idea. And
Yeah.
I'll just cap off by saying that probably one of the more exciting things that we're looking at is in New Jersey, where the likely new governor, has said very clearly and has really run on the campaign of creating a state public bank, which would be a very, very big deal for America, because for the state to actually consider incorporating a public bank will mean that we will have gotten past the barrier of control and the influence of the Wall Street banks, which for up until this time has basically taken the state public bank prospect out at the final hours by saying, the lobbyists and the friends saying, you guys don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The influence peddlers and so on. So we'll see, but whether or not the new governor here, or the likely new governor here, follows through. But as citizens, people are banding together to look at how they can make the case, educating their neighbors, and then also telling them about the options and what benefits will be realized. And so we're really starting to work to support our elected officials in taking that next step.
That sounds great. Ellen, do you want to describe maybe the way the current system works? Because I think so few people understand the Federal Reserve and really even understand where our money comes from. It's one of those things, I've thought about this so much because I was in college. I studied a lot of economics and political science, and I get out of college. I was probably 25, 26 years old, and I realized I had no idea where my dollar bill that I spend every day comes from. And I think that so many people are still stuck in that rut. They have no idea how money is created. And so they don't understand any of the macroeconomics that are really going on and how much these affect their daily lives. So can you just kind of describe how the Federal Reserve works and how this the fractional reserve system works and how it's a debt-based currency, this fiat currency that we're using right now?
Right. Well, I agree that I think we're intentionally not told all that because, in fact, 95% of our money supply is created by banks when they make loans. That used to be considered conspiracy theory, but the Bank of England in 2014 confirmed it in their quarterly report, and the Bundesbank has now confirmed it, I think in June of this year, among other authorities, but these are central banks themselves that have confirmed that banks do not lend their deposits, contrary to popular belief. They don't get money in and then lend it out again. They're not just intermediaries. That's what this thing in the Bank of England said, that they create deposits when they make loans. So they find the money later. They scramble around to balance their books later, but they issue the money first. So if you have, for example, if you have it in one bank issuing a loan, and let's say to a homeowner to buy a home, and then if the land or the seller is in the same bank, then you will have this loan creating money. So it will go from one account to another. The bank will create the money, it goes into the other account, and it doesn't really affect anything. On their own books, they've got a plus and a minus, and it comes out to zero. If the check goes into another bank, let's say that the seller is in another bank, then you will have a minus. Let's say it was $500,000. You got $500,000 going out, but you might have the other bank might have just done the same thing, created a mortgage. I mean, you've got banks all across the country issuing loans and creating money in the form of loans. And so you've got deposits coming in and going out all day long. So if you get as many deposits coming in as going out, your books balance, and you don't have to borrow anywhere. You're actually borrowing from your depositors, but nowadays they don't even pay interest to the depositors. So they've just got this pool of money. Mm-hmm. And if they come up short on their deposits, they only have to balance the books at the end of the day. This gets kind of complicated, but if they come up short, then they borrow. The Federal Reserve treats it as an automatic overdraft in their Fed account, their reserve account, and they can borrow temporarily from the Fed, and then they have to cure the problem by finding money somewhere else. Anyway, they are, when you get economists that'll say, oh no, that's not the way it works, or bankers will say, no, they're actually lending their deposits, or that they have to cover that loan that they created with some sort of, they have to borrow it somewhere, which is true. But because they're all creating this money all at once, and new deposits are coming in at the same time that they're going out, you've got money being created all across the system as a net money creation. So I guess I didn't explain that very well, but okay, so you've got double entry bookkeeping. That's how it's all done, double entry bookkeeping. So if you create a mortgage, you've got a $500,000 liability on your books because you've got to cover that check when it goes out, but you've also got a $500,000 asset on your books because the borrower has agreed to pay you that back over time with interest. So the books, your own books balance, you've got a plus 500 and a minus 500, and then that $500,000 that goes out into another bank is $500,000 that's now circulating in the economy that wasn't there before. Mm-hmm. But in fact, all our private loans most of them do get paid back. The ones that don't get paid back, the ones that actually create our money supply that stays out there. I should say that the Bank of England said that 97% of the money in the circulating money supply in the UK was created in this way. And if you look at a chart of the US money supply, about 10% of the M2 money supply is in paper dollar bills and coins. I mean, it's almost nothing coins. It's almost all paper dollar bills, but half of that is abroad. So only about 5% of the money supply in the United States is actually these paper dollar bills created by the Federal Reserve, and all the rest are created by banks when they make loans. And even that 5% that's created by the Fed, they print the bills, but they don't just print them and spend them as they would if it was the Treasury issuing. People think that this is government money and the government just prints it and spends it, and then they blame the government when there's too much money out there. But it's not the government at all. It's the Federal Reserve prints these dollars, and they go, and they're lent or bought by the other banks. In other words, the Fed gets that money for free, and then they get the seigniorage, which is the difference between what they pay to print the bill and the face amount of the bill. Like $100 bill, they basically get $100 less 6%, or like 6 cents to print the thing. Yes, well, I didn't say that very well.
Go ahead.
I just want to say it's kind of amusing because one of the things in Doug's question about where's my money coming from, almost like what is it? And it's amusing to hear you describe what a shell game it is, about how it's represented, and exchanged, and when in fact and people think that it's valuable, think that money or coins have value, like gold or silver or something. That's extreme stuff. Really, it's just a representation of a relationship. And I think one of the things that's pretty exciting about, I think, Ellen's latest work is really discovering money, or redescribing it as a crediting system, as a relationship of I credit you, you credit me,
right?
And we have that simplicity of exchange having nothing to do with, with gold and frankincense and myrrh.
I have heard that like 90% of the money is basically used as credit. I mean, if somebody buys, you're buying a product from a manufacturer and you're going to sell it in your store, so they extend to you, $20,000 worth of credit, so you buy it from their manufacturing plant, and then you get the stuff to your store and you sell it in the store and then pay it back to the manufacturer. And this is like 90% of the transactions in the entire economy, which is basically just, flipping money. So that a credit system like you're talking about, I think, could actually function for a lot of the economy without having to deal with the dollar bill or the Federal Reserve at all. So that is an interesting concept.
That's actually what I was just writing about. The coming revolution in banking, that now with the cryptocurrencies, you can actually literally cut out the middleman. You could cut out the bank and you could cut out the government, and you could have a system where it is like one big community currency where you create your own money, your own IOU. What you have today is the bank turns your IOU into something acceptable in the marketplace. If you went to the grocery store and tried to write out an IOU, the grocer wouldn't take it. But you go to the bank and write out your IOU, which in the form of a mortgage, or you sign some sort of contract that you will pay this back. The bank will turn your IOU into something you can spend at the grocery store. That in effect, the bank is covering it. So it used to be they actually printed their own paper banknotes, and that was fractional reserve lending. Like they might have 10% gold and then 90, but they'd print 10 notes for every $1 in gold. They'd print 10 notes. They knew they could get away with 10 to 1 because people only came for their gold 10% of the time. And then with the National Bank Act during the Civil War, it imposed a very heavy tax on these state-issued paper notes. And so and the idea was to get all the banks to join the federal system. But many state banks or state chartered banks continued to be state chartered banks, but instead of issuing their own banknotes, they just wrote the money into the borrower's deposit account. So you write the banknote when you write the check, so you're signing it, and it's basically guaranteed by the bank, but it's still your IOU being turned into money through this whole process. But you could cut out the bank and do the whole thing cryptographically with something in the nature of, it's a blockchain similar to Bitcoin, but in fact, I would argue Bitcoin won't work. I mean, Bitcoin is a different model. It's actually the gold-based, commodity-based money is a commodity model. And in fact, what we are looking at is a mutual credit model where you're clearing balances, like with a community currency, where money comes into existence when two people agree to exchange. So one person winds up with a debit and the other winds up with a credit, and that's how money comes into existence in a digital community currency system. Whereas in a Bitcoin system, like gold, it's something you have to mine. You have to get it from somewhere else. You have to borrow it or mine it yourself. And then it's a thing. And then because it's this unique thing that you don't want to duplicate, you have to trace it through the system, and you've got all these millions of computers tracing it. So it turns out that the amount of Bitcoin out there now, just the cost for the transactions now, is as much energy as Ireland uses in a day goes into these Bitcoin transactions.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of resource that goes into manufacturing Bitcoin.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's because it's on the Austrian system of money is a commodity. But in our whole national system, money is not a commodity. It's a mutual credit system. It's actually just a clearing system. The bank keeps its own books and clears its debits and credits, and if it goes into another bank, then it's cleared through the Federal Reserve, and internationally it's cleared through the SWIFT system, the ACH system. Is that SWIFT? Yeah. And then now the IMF is talking about setting up an SDR system as a unit for clearing. But anyway, the whole thing is really just mutual credit, that you have one party creating the money and another party coming up with the debit.
I would just add, if I may, Ellen's talking about the commodity nature of how people think about money, and what we've been teaching or people are speaking to is the utility of money. That money is a utility and an agreement. And in the cultural shift, the paradigm shift that we need to be moving toward, relative to municipal dollars, state and public dollars, and so forth, we need to start to see that money is not only not scarce, but that it is a utility that everyone is entitled to have, like water, electricity, as healthcare would be today's theme. But those things are part of being in the human community, and money is merely one of the devices that we have to get on with our lives.
Well, and where virtually all money comes from now is you're turning your own future productivity into something you can spend now. That's what it is. Turning your own IOU, your own promise to pay later, into something you can spend now. So there's as much money as there are workers and materials, as there are potential productivity. You should have the money to match that. And so instead of thinking you've got to get the money first and put it into a savings account and then you can make loans, that's not the way it works. You've got to lend the money first. You've got to create the credit first and put the product together. You've got to get the workers and materials together to create the product before you can sell it, before you can actually get the money. So the credit goes first, or the debit, and then you pay it back with the productivity.
And you see how upside down that is? Because right now we don't have the money to fix the bridge, as opposed to saying, hey, that bridge is going to fall in, fix it.
Yeah.
Right.
The system right now is that what they've got us wired is that we have to borrow it from these people and pay them to borrow the money that really belongs to us anyway, as the people.
Well, I think
there's that joke. There's that joke about the spaceman that comes to New Orleans during the hurricane and says, or after the hurricane, and the city's a mess, and he said, "Oh, what happened here?" And that the mayor comes to greet him and says, "Oh, we had this horrible hurricane, and it's just." And he said, "Well, why can't you fix it?" And he says, the spaceman says, "Oh, I know, you probably don't have the workers." "Oh, no, we have plenty of workers." "Well, you probably don't have the materials." No, we have plenty of materials. What we don't have are these little green pieces of paper that you need to get the workers and the materials together.
Right.
And the spaceman says, "Beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life on Earth."
Yeah. Well, I think what Walt said really hit the nail on the head, this idea of scarcity. And I think that the current system, like this Federal Reserve System, actually creates a sense of an artificial scarcity. Whereas what you're saying, money should just be almost like a metaphor for potential productivity that we all have. So we have plenty of ability to work, plenty of ability to get resources, plenty of ability to manufacture those resources into something functional. And yet there's this system that's in place right now that I think creates this artificial scarcity. And maybe another thing I'd like for you to address is when you're talking about the money supply. Well, why don't we just start there? Why don't you just start with the concept of scarcity and how we can address that?
Right. Scarcity is a control mechanism. I mean, it's a parasite on the literally usury, or I think interest is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So I guess I shouldn't use the term usury. But anyway, the idea that there's a limited amount of money and that the banks actually create scarcity so that we will borrow and so that we will pay them a nice interest rate. They don't want money sloshing around out there.
Right. I mean, they're making money on all the credit card debt and the student loan debt and all the car loan debt. We've got all these debt bubbles that are happening right now because people just don't have enough money to pay for the stuff themselves because of the work that they're doing. And it's actually is crazy, like you're talking about. Like if we just had enough money in the money supply, so that kind of leads me to my second question. And I know, like, it does not have to work like this. And in the public banking model, it doesn't work like this. But in the current model, we've actually got a situation where these banks are making loans. And so that money goes out into the money supply. But then they're asking for those loans back plus interest. And the interest doesn't exist in the money supply. That didn't get loaned out in the first place. And I think, am I correct in thinking that this then creates this competitive environment? Like there's not enough money in the money supply for all the loans to get paid back plus the interest. So there's got to be some losers in there somewhere. Everybody's always constantly scrambling to pay off that interest so that the bankers can end up with, the bankers are ending up with the interest. And then if you can't pay the loan back because you can't get the money, then they end up with the property that you bought with the money in the first place. So they're making out like bandits.
Or you have to borrow some more, which is what they want you to do.
Right.
And that's called the debt virus theory, and I've gotten into endless trouble by saying that's how it. Here's the counter argument to that is that the debt actually can be paid if you assume that the let's say the banker, you only pay it by the month. You don't have to pay the whole thing at once. So you pay by the month whatever you owe, $3,000 a month, let's say, on this mortgage, and the banker hires you to scrub his floors. Well, he's not going to pay you $3,000. Let's say you borrow $10,000 from the bank, repayable at the rate 20% repayable at the rate of $1,000 a month. So you only have to pay $1,000 a month. And let's say the banker hires you to scrub his floors for $1,000 a month. In 12 months, you've paid off the loan, and the banker has gotten your labor basically for free.
Right.
For a year. But that's the problem. That's the whole thing. They've got we're slave labor. I mean, it does work if they would pay us for starters. And of course, the bank does not hire their debtors. What they do with their money mostly is put it into this other economy. We've got two economies going, the speculative economy of money making money. Mm-hmm. They put it out there and it just keeps growing and growing, and then they pass it on to their kids where it grows and grows. So their whole net worth just keeps growing and growing and growing, sucking money out of the system. If they did pay it back, in fact, in the public banking model, we're talking about paying it back. That's it. You put the money back into the local economy. You pay for workers, pay for materials, you build things, and you charge a very modest interest that they can afford to pay.
And the interest goes back. The interest then goes back to your government. It doesn't go into the speculative economy. So your community is benefiting from both ends.
Right, and it goes, and the government itself spends the interest on. So it's out there in the economy to pay back the interest on the debt. So it works as long as it's a public bank that returns the money to the system. Private banks do not return the money to the system. It's often offshore tax havens or who knows where, but it's not coming back to our economy. So that's one of our big arguments for our own banks, is that we'll put it back into our own economy.
The web of debt, to coin a phrase, the web of debt that we find ourselves in is, thanks to Ellen's work, it reveals the predicament that we're in, which is unsustainable, because there you cannot borrow yourself out of debt, right? And so, but we assume it as as if it were as fish in water. Just assume what's in the water. We're stuck in a system like that. Now, the parasitic system that Ellen was talking about, Michael Hudson writes about, I think, really brilliantly, a nice metaphor, talking about the parasite that feeds on the host. Killing the Host was the name of his book. Mm-hmm. And he basically illustrates that in biology, a parasite, a really effective parasite, has a way of getting into the host's brain and making the host think that it's doing them a favor, which of course, and this of course is how this debt bug parasite has gotten to our thinking too, that banks are doing us a favor by giving us all this money. Well, right. Yeah, I mean, if we can't get anywhere else, but the absurdity of borrowing money from somebody else when you've got it yourself is the realization that the public banking frontier or prospect is affording. People are starting to see, wait a minute, we're being duped. Not only that, we're being taken horribly, because the debt load is unsustainable, and the interest rates are now down to a point where there's very little margin for them to do business banking the way they used to. Their system is crashing, and it's taking us with them, and it's happening quickly enough that not only are people railing against the criminality of their banks that are doing their business, but there's no place for people to grow, to go, no prospect, losing their jobs, can't afford education, et cetera, et cetera. So we're on a downward spiral. Mm-hmm. Public bank provides an alternative. And if we say, let's keep Wells Fargo, well, they don't have public banks to go to just yet. That's really what we're seeing on the frontier around the country, is that public banking is posed as an alternative, and a systemic alternative to the people who are stuck.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate what Ellen was talking about. There has actually been created, I think, a second class. I mean, this upper class of banksters. I love that term, the banksters, because they're skimming off the top. When all of the interest payments in this debt-based system are going through the banks and then out into this speculative economy, as Ellen was saying, and then this wealthy class basically, I mean, that's what they're doing. They're skimming off the top of the entire economy and just growing and growing and growing this massive amount of wealth for a handful of people. While, like what you described, Walt, the rest of us are basically required over time to get more and more and more in debt, so that now we're in debt for our cars and our student loans and our health care and, I mean, everything else, that the whole system. I mean, I don't shy away from that term debt slavery at this point. You get into this downward spiral, as you're describing, and this is just an inevitability of this system that's creating this false scarcity around the money supply, and then skimming off the top through the interest payments to, the 1% or the 0.1% or the 0.01% really that are at the top of this pyramid. So now why don't we turn to the solution? And you've alluded to it about public banking. I actually had, as we tried to promote public banking here in Mendocino County, I mean, I talked to the county treasurer here about it. And they were scared out of their minds that the initiative was going to pass. Because they didn't have any idea, it seemed so different to them on the one hand. And then on the other hand, I think that when you start crunching the numbers, because what you're talking about is turning this downward spiral around into a net positive spiral, so that over time your community is accruing the assets and the value and everything else that's now going into this speculative economy. And I mean, we were starting to crunch the numbers, like with our public bank, we were having hundreds of millions of dollars. If our tax money in our Mendocino County has less than 100,000 people in it, but if we had the tax money going into a public bank and they could lend that out right into our own economy, that tax money, so there's the fractional reserve system, so they can lend out multiples of what they have in the bank from the taxes that they got. And then that money goes out into the economy and starts to be productive right here in our own community. Then they're getting more tax money back, and the interest that's getting paid back on the loans is going back to the county. I mean, it was unbelievable to the people we were trying to explain it to, because the net positives were so powerful that they were like, well, we'd be doing that. Of course we'd be doing that if that were true, like they couldn't believe the level of the scam that was going on, and they couldn't believe the actual benefits they could get from this public banking model. It was just almost too much for them. Can you talk to that?
You can do fractional reserve is the multiples of your capital, not multiples of your deposits. And a lot of people get that wrong. So you leverage your capital, not your deposits. So in other words, the Bank of North Dakota, I think, currently has a 70% loan to deposit ratio, right? So they have 70% as much loans as they have deposits. But so here's the thing. You could take your say you have $1 billion. This is what I'm thinking the state of California should do. Let's say you start with $1 billion. And this could be, say, in your infrastructure bank, you've got $1 billion to lend. Well, the normal way to do it is you lend it out, you wait for it to come back, and then you lend it again. You can only lend your $1 million once until it comes back. If you use that as capital for your bank, you can lend out $10 million. But you do need $10 million in deposits to balance your books. But for the state of California, they've got, for example, $70 billion in the Treasurer's investment pool, earning, last time I looked, it was earning I think 0.82%. So earning under 1%. And if you were using that, if you were doing loans, say at 4 or 5%, depending on what kind of loan, or 2 or 3% even, you're earning a lot more on that same money. You see what I mean? So sure. You've got enough money to pay. You can still pay the interest that they're earning now, and you're still going to come out with a nice profit, and you can direct all those loans to all those businesses and students or whatever that need them in the economy.
Yeah, the infrastructure lending, for example, she gave an example of the iBank in California with the revolving fund. But the ability to leverage that way is a game changer, and it takes it makes your financing counter-cyclical, so it's independent of the market flows and the complications of market stresses. You're independent of the the criminal behaviors of the bankers. You have an isolated spot where you're able to actually build something on your own that has some promise.
So, Walt, what have you noticed as you go around to the communities on the ground that are trying to make these changes? What are the issues that you're running into? I'm talking to the public officials that are contemplating instituting public banking in their areas. I found here on the ground, there's just so much skepticism. And I mean, as I'm sure the listener understands, that this stuff gets so complicated that it is hard for people to wrap their minds around it and really understand what's going on. I think that's one of the reasons, in my mind, the extent of the scam, the way that the bankers are able to hide behind the complexity of the banking system in order to produce something that doesn't really work for the benefit of the vast majority of us and kind of get away with it. So when you're going around to communities and to, and especially working with the elected officials, what are you finding in terms of their skepticisms or the challenges that you're facing trying to institute these ideas?
Well, we had a wonderful experience up in Seattle where senators and members of the Treasury Department all gathered for a workshop around creating a Seattle state bank. And they were down with it. They really got it. They said, look, this has been on our floor for 5 or 6 years, and we really want to finally get this thing through because it had always been pocketed at the last minute by the chairman of the committee or other high-ranking or lobby-influenced legislators. So seen very positive indicators there. And, of course, I mentioned the future governor of New Jersey. But there is that hesitancy on the part of financial managers because they haven't seen this. And they're trying to make things work for their municipality or their state. They have ways of doing business. They have people that they do business with. Some of them hope to be able to retire to do work with the banks that they're borrowing from. They have borrowing relationships with bond markets. They are, so they have a personal professional relationship and experience. They've never heard from this. Banking departments haven't heard about public banking, even though they're all over the world. Mm-hmm. So we have to, there's an educational phase there. But we're also finding, ironically, that even bankers and these financial people don't know about how money gets made. The money that you can leverage your capital. They don't see that would be. They've never thought about having that as a tool in their own toolbox. So they're beset with some of the same thinking and the trends of operation that the rest of us are. So we're very early in the educational process. People are starting to discover what money is and also what it could be, but for the way we think of it. But the logic is very compelling. The common sense of keeping your money at home, investing into yourself, is they do see that, and there are plenty of representatives around the country who are not only in office but running for office who think this is something to stand on, someplace to go. So we're excited about how that's going along.
Yeah, we have found that the people that get on board the fastest are the bankers because they understand it.
Wow.
For example, Phil Murphy was a Goldman Sachs banker, and as soon as he heard about it, I guess you can tell it better than I can, Walt, but his eyes lit up and he understood the potential. Whereas people that don't understand how banking works, you got to start from scratch and walk them through it. And politicians are inherently resistant to change. They want to preserve their jobs. They don't want to go out there and do something really risky. They know they're going to get pushback from that Wall Street banks. Mm-hmm. So the one easy out for the politicians, you met this too probably, is this provision in state laws all across the country that says the state shall not lend, or the credit of the state shall not be lent, something like that. But if you trace those laws back, that they originated it was before the Civil War, when you had the railroad companies were coming into these towns, and the local politicians saw this as an opportunity for the town, and so they guaranteed the loans of these railroad companies, and then the railroad companies went bust. And so some states put that in their constitutions. That's when they were forming these constitutions, was in the mid-19th century. The California Constitution was formed in 1849. And so that's when that provision dates back to, and there's like virtually no law under it. They never used that law. There's no case law to see what it actually means. Mm-hmm. But it goes back to this time when the states were guaranteeing private loans, and that's what it's talking about. But that's not what we're talking about here.
And then another common pushback is that, and we hear this even from politicians here in New Jersey, in particular, say, "Wait a minute, you're going to give the politicians a bank? You know how corrupt this place is?"
Right.
and it's really interesting, because that, of course, is true. I mean, corruption is an issue, but it's also something that we are able to design around, that you accept inside the design of the architecture of the institution, that you don't let this group of people make loan decisions. You don't have the special interests on the board of directors. You have the loans being very transparent. You have the citizen stakeholder interests represented on the board of directors or in the board of advisors. You design the management to be outside the cycle of political electioneering, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that, well, we have a democracy, we've got the capability for the people to have an influence and a functioning machine. Now all we have to do is make sure that it has integrity. Well, you know what, man? I mean, we can have integrity in our public works. In fact, we have it all the time. You look at the FAA, look at all the systems that we rely on, how well government does it. Well, so one of the things that we're up against around the country is this 40-year-old lie, this myth that government can't do anything about. That the private.
Who would you rather have doing your banking for you? Your elected officials that you elected, that the populace elected, or private Wall Street bankers that we already know where that leads to? We've seen the results in the 2008 collapse. And
the most serial criminal entity of any corporate body in the world.
Mm-hmm. Right. You want known criminals or only suspected criminals?
Right.
But with cryptography, now that was the thing about blockchain and cryptography, is you can actually make it so that it is immutable, transparent, and you can track it. And as long as you've got public information, FOIA, Freedom of Information laws, you can go in there and see who spent it and for what, and you can get on them if it's not spent right. Whereas even with those laws, you could go into JP Morgan Chase and they'll say, okay, so we spent it on our own stuff. Try to stop it.
What are you going to do to me?
Yeah.
No one goes to prison here.
The Federal Reserve's not even allowed to be audited by Congress right now, so nobody knows what's going on in there either. I mean, transparency is certainly the key. And like you said, Walt, I mean, I know when we were thinking about writing this in the charter, I mean, the government would have owned the bank, but the bank is a separate entity, and has certain legal obligations. It can't just function corrupt, without having lawsuits and there's there's that firewall in between. It's a different organization, with its own board of directors and its own, its own separate functionality, just like any other bank. So there are ways to ensure the integrity, and as long as there's transparency there, anybody can check it out. Everybody can check it out and make sure that things are functioning the way they should be functioning.
Yeah, right now there's this big push for the state wants a cannabis bank. They really want to figure out what to do with all that cannabis cash.
Right.
They want $1 billion they're going to get in taxes. So it is a big opportunity for setting up a state bank, but unfortunately, there's the problem that it's illegal, and so for that reason, you have all kinds of roadblocks. I mean, we haven't figured out exactly how to get around the fact that the Fed can just come in and snatch all that money.
But I think we're arriving at an interesting point historically and economically, where, as we've been saying, the interest that we're acquiring, the debt we're acquiring, is unsustainable. So, and that money, because we can't borrow our way out of or pay for the impending expenses that are before us to repair all the stuff that's been broken, all the stuff that we need, we're getting to a point where FDR was back in the 30s, where everybody was out of work. They blew up the financial systems, working in anybody's interest. And what did he do? He issued money and put people to work. There's plenty to do. A lot of people to need it, and spent it into the economy and made America great.
Right.
Made America great. By putting America to work with money that was not borrowed necessarily. It was issued from the government and it did. I mean, Ellen can tell you chapter and verse about that much better. But it
was actually borrowed. But where did they get the money? They borrowed it from the great cloud.
Yeah. So we have to do that again. And of course, some of this is being talked about in terms of having universal basic income as a way of moving the money out to where it needs to be for people to have lives and to survive. But if we don't do something like that, if we don't do those things, there's going to be a lot of misery to be paid and a lot of, I think, social upheaval and social unrest that will make life much less bearable than now.
Well, can you go back and talk? Let's just talk about how the public bank would work a little bit more, about the nuts and bolts of it, and how it does create this upward spiral, so that the money starts to stay local and it starts to grow in your community, so that instead of this debt-based system that we're living in now, where the money gets siphoned out into Wall Street and the speculative economy, if that money starts to stay in your local economy, then it's growing and growing. So over time, everyone just starts to get enriched in the public system. I mean, this is the aha moment for me. That light bulb needs to go on for people that are listening to this, to be like, okay, we can set up a system where if our economy is productive, then we get to keep that productivity. Another interesting thing, just to bring this up, I saw a graph the other day that productivity has been increasing, of course, as the economy gets more efficient. But since 1975, the workers haven't seen it. It hasn't come into real wages. I think that's what we're really getting at here. The fiat currency system is not getting productivity increase back into the hands of the working class. It's siphoning it up into this speculative economy. So, let's just to get the nuts and bolts of how does public banking really work to keep the money local?
Well, I just like to say the financialization, what you're describing is the financialization of our system, which has created runaway inequality because people are making money through exchange of paper and just moving paper. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But one example of what you're talking about making the shift between the current unsustainable system and the prospective public banking system would be, for example, let's say a municipal lending or municipal project. Right now, your cities and states and counties borrow the money that they don't have to do the projects. And so they go to Wall Street and they pay. It winds up costing us twice as much to get the same thing done because half of it, fully half of it, is money that goes to the financiers. Mm-hmm. If you finance it with a public bank, you have a public bank that's capable of lending the $30 million or writing the paper for it, then you are doing a couple of things. You're saving on the cost of the bridge financing because if, as in North Dakota, you can get money at 2% for municipalities structure, and you borrow it for 20 years, that 2%, gets paid to yourself, and you're saving all of that money and all the money is staying in the area. So the bank is getting richer. That is to say, it's getting more and more ability to lend more and more money. And as its mission is designed to do this, it's able to spend more money, give more money into the economy for small business lending, to cooperate, support community bankers and credit unions, to give students much a better break on their financing, and to stimulate businesses that you want to target and encourage. So your public policy is, again, it's flipped on its head. You suddenly are living not only within your means, but your means are benefiting and growing around you as a result of using this system of finance.
Yeah, we had the idea here in Mendocino County in our public banking coalition of using the public bank to finance, for example, the Noyo Harbour, which is a fairly large harbor in our city of Fort Bragg, which would then allow goods and services to start coming in from the harbor instead of, up and down the highway corridor that the rest of the state uses. And then in improving our the train infrastructure here so that we could have public transportation, so we could have had a harbor and we could have had goods and services going around the county based on the infrastructure that we built for ourselves through the public bank that we could have financed with the bank that would have brought more industry in. It does, like you're talking about. I mean, that was just sort of our vision that suddenly became possible when we became, as a county, independent of that. That's another thing that comes to mind with all of this too. Municipalities becoming independent financially from the state and the federal system or the larger corporate system. Like once you can finance these things yourself, then you don't have to beg the state of California or the federal government to come in and bail you out, which is kind of the situation that we're in right now. When, all of the Mendocino County right now is paying so much money in interest to the private banks that they can't afford to do anything like this right now. And when they do need things like that, they have to beg for money from the state or from the national government.
Right.
What do they pay in interest? Or has anybody figured out what they're paying interest in fees?
I've been trying to remember, and I swear that the number that I heard was $100,000 a month that they're paying in interest right now in Mendocino County to Bank of America. And that's what I heard when we were running the campaign. And now my memory is like, can that possibly be real? But I'm pretty sure that that's what it is. They're so up to their eyeballs in debt and they're paying this massive interest payment and they can barely afford to keep the police force going. We can't afford to take care of, we're having a mental health crisis right now in the county.
You illustrate something I think that really illustrates the nuts of it. The city councils, state councils will do everything they need to pay the debt service. Pay the debt service first before they improve the school, replace the cars, or hire the extra police officers. Pay the debt service. The banks get it first. Why? In part because they don't want to jeopardize their credit rating so that their borrowing can be cheaper. You see, it's all about the same thing. We're all, as you say, we're debt slaves. We are serving this system from morning to night, right and left, every which way we look at it.
Yeah. So, and if we are the bank, then the state or the municipality gets that interest, and so, like you say, then that can go into your local economy.
Yeah, so it's breaking the cycle of more debt and more taxes, a downward spiral, and instead it's going investment in equity. So that's the difference. That's the structural systemic difference.
I feel like once people understand this, it's such a no-brainer. It's like we've got to start moving in this direction. If we want to see the change that needs to happen, because right now, the problem is systemic. This debt problem. All of our governments are in debt. All of our households are in debt. The whole system is based on debt. Everyone is in debt. It's not working. We have to turn this around somehow. The system, to understand then that the system was designed to do this to us, and if we have to change the system in order to turn things around, but there's plenty, everybody's working here. There's plenty of productivity. There's this thing called the internet now that makes things really productive. Like if we can figure out, how to turn it around, then everyone should really feel abundance in their lives, and we can get away from this, scraping by every day just to pay the bills. And as you're saying, it's almost like a brainwashing on the county, on this government level, where even on the county officials or the city officials, their number one priority is to pay off the debt service. Like you've got to get out of that mindset and start, instead of scraping by to pay off the debt, you've got to be bringing abundance to the people.
Yeah, and 1/3 of our federal income taxes goes to pay off the debt. 1/3,
Oh,
and then 50% goes to the military. So it's no wonder
right.
there's nothing left over for what we think we're paying for,
Well, let's
government
not
purposes.
yeah, and this is, as you said, Doug, it is intended to be that way. It's not just the city, the Mendocino County, or the state of California, or the United States. It's the world. The global financial cartel controls most of the world
Yeah.
with this system, which is why Greece, of course, being taken down, Puerto Rico, Cyprus,
Hmm.
Europe's on the verge of things not working. So,
Chicago.
so yeah. So what we have
Chicago.
to do, and I think what we all have to do, individually have to do, is speak to this. Speak to the possibility that we can do this different, that money is not scarce, that in fact, we have a role to to create a new paradigm, a new sense of our ability to have a system that serves everyone, no one and nothing left out. We don't have to keep kowtowing to the people that we've always gotten our goods from. Let's start taking matters into.
It is
Yeah.
a Ellen.
Well, and on the federal level, you can have the federal government. If you want to call it borrowing, there was that whole, the Dennis Kucinich bill for 100% reserve, anyway, for the government issued money, basically. So I remember one advocate who was talking to a legislator, and the legislator said, "Well, we're actually more comfortable borrowing the money than printing the money." So fine, if they want to borrow it, let them borrow it from the Federal Reserve, which prints it.
Hmm.
So you've got a debt out there, which is how they spend it anyway. The government spends the money first. So what they do is they just start writing checks on their Fed account. And then at the end of the year, they balance it up. And if there's not enough money coming in from the fiscal year, if there's not enough money coming in for taxes, then they borrow by issuing bonds for the difference. But instead of issuing bonds, if you just borrow directly from the Federal Reserve, which creates the money on its books, so you've got a debt to the Fed, then the Fed returns the interest to the government after deducting their costs. But anyway, most of it goes back to the government. So basically, it's an interest-free loan that never has to get paid back because nobody ever pays back the federal debt. That $20 trillion debt that we have is never going to get repaid.
Hmm.
The big issue is the interest. If the debt itself is just sitting there, it's the equivalent of our $20 trillion money supply. It is our money supply. It's the negative that creates the positive
Right.
that's
Right.
circulating in the economy.
Why are we paying interest on it?
Let's spend. Yeah, let them spend to fix all this hurricane damage or
Right.
all those things we need. Let them do like the Chinese do, which is just issue the money, borrow it from the Chinese own 80% of their banks still, even with some privatization now or allowance of foreign banks to come in. They still own 80% of their banks. They borrow the money from their infrastructure banks to build these 12,000 miles of high-speed rail in 10 years. How did they do that? They just issued the money, but allegedly borrowed from their banks, which then is repaid easily. Those railroads have made a lot of money. I mean, it's easy
Hmm.
to pay the loan back with infrastructure because these are almost by definition self-funding loans, the kind of loans that generate productivity.
Well, what's just so amazing to me, because people are constantly talking about the problems, the problems, the problems, and then there actually are solutions. Like this is a huge solution to a very big problem, and yet it's amazing how few people understand it. You get almost no press from the mainstream media, which is amazing. It goes to show you that this banking class has so much clout. I mean, they're making so much money off of these interest payments, like you said, 30% of the national of your income tax going straight to the bankers, that they can afford to buy off the media. They can afford to buy off the politicians. We've got a couple of minutes left here, and I just wanted to let you know, Ellen, like I interviewed Robert David Steele and Cynthia McKinney last week from the hashtag Unrig.
Oh, boy.
And I know that you had endorsed them and their movement. And I think that it's such, I mean, because this concept that you're talking about, public banking, I mean, this really should go beyond left and right. We need to just get people to stop, fighting each other in this left-right paradigm and start to focus on these solutions that are right in front of our faces, and then battle the corruption that is preventing us from moving forward and having what Robert David Steele called evidence-based governance. I mean, instead of our politicians, talking about what are the real solutions, what's the evidence, what's going to work, let's make it work, they're getting lobbying money from corporations. And then they're like Frankenstein monstering this economy together based on giving these big corporations the handouts. And, of course, the banking cartel is the hub of that whole corporate wheel. So things just aren't working. Do you see some kind of longer term solution to this, what seems to be such a corrupt, the corrupt system in politics that then leads to this kind of corrupt banking system that's siphoning all this money up into this speculative economy?
Yeah, well, I think we just really have to wake up the people. I mean, that whole divide and conquer thing is classic for how you conquer. That, like, you've got the people fighting each other and not looking at who the real enemy is, who is the puppeteers who are making them fight each other. I mean, we've got a literal civil war going on right now. I read that somewhere where people can't even talk to each other. That they hate each other so much. The two sides hate each other so much.
Right.
In fact, my best friend, I shouldn't say that. Anyway, I won't reveal my leanings on this. But anyway, yeah. So, and it's because we're reading or looking at different media. They get one message and the other side gets the other message, and then we can't come together. So it's like in the Wizard of Oz. When you wake up, when you realize that you've got the slippers on your feet all along, you've got a heart, you've got a brain. You don't need, we've got the power within us. We just need to throw off our captors, and we are free. We can be free, just with another way of looking at it. The whole, the Wizard of Oz, that Frank Baum was a theosophist, among other things. And theosophy was Indian philosophy or Hindu philosophy imported to England and then to the U.S. But a basic tenet of theosophy was you create your own reality. You are what you believe. You are what you think. So we, the people, just have to realize that we've been enslaved by a power that is a paper tiger. They've only got the power that we give them, and we need to take that power back, and we can.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And how they've anesthetized thinking through the media, through the sensational media, has kept us away from the power that we have as individuals to make the substantive changes that have to be made. I think where there's some urgency right now, Doug, about this, and not only are these storms indicative of that, but we see the cycle of the climate, the changing climate, the realities of rising waters, changing temperatures, changing soils, etc. There is a major crisis here that will not be solved by borrowing money from Wall Street. But it will not, and even if we could, we wouldn't solve it, because the problem lies within us and the separation that we have created in our society between us. We have to rediscover that the paradigm of collaboration, mutual support, respect, and care for each other is the only sustainable economic system. Just like nature, it all has to work for everybody. And so we have to start thinking and talking that way as a practical, hard-nosed sort of reality. Look, these are things we have to do something about in a whole new way. The old systems are not going to work. So public banking's, a great task that requires discipline and serious engagement. It's not just a feel-good kind of a movement. It's something that has a real agenda, a real working agenda to pursue. It's going to take us all. I'm really delighted to meet all you guys in Mendocino. How hard you worked on that. It was really, I congratulate you on going through all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I was very impressed also when I was up there a few years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great. It was great to get everybody together and to do our part. I mean, we got 42% of that vote, and that was only, I think, because
That's
the board of
amazing.
supervisors came out and they came out and they kind of snookered us with this. They tried to pretend like it was going to be expensive, that the charter commission was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to write the charter. And we were all like, we're all volunteers. I don't, we could borrow a room from the county and write the charter. I don't think it's going to cost any money. They really had to fabricate these expenses, these artificial expenses. And then, of course, they were able to publicize it all around the county and people thought it was going to be expensive. And it was difficult to fight the powers that be. And they just, the reason why they were not supportive was because it was too much of a change. Like you're saying, that there's just so much, it was too different. They didn't quite understand it. They're so used to making those debt payments, that debt service like you're talking about, that they couldn't comprehend that there is a different way. They were so scared of getting sued. Oh, the state's going to sue us if we try this. And so, it's a shift in consciousness, so that, like you're talking about, Walt, people need to understand we've got to start thinking outside of the box. I mean, there's just this box and it's a prison. And if we just start thinking outside of it, the solutions are right in front of our face. But it's going to take a lot of education and overcoming a lot of this fear that's just inside of people. They want to believe that the system has been in place to help them out, and it takes a lot even just to convince them that, like, no, these people are taking advantage of you. So we'll just keep fighting the good fight. I hope that we're back in 2020 to try to do it again, because we did, 42%'s getting pretty close.
That's great that you're still at it.
Right? Yeah, we'll keep it up. Anyway, just with the last couple of minutes, then, do you want to talk about, like, I know, Ellen, what is your new position at the Public Banking Institute, and what are your plans for the future there? And then whatever contact information for the Public Banking Institute, and Walt, then where you're moving on to, I guess, is what I understand, and what you're going to be doing in the future.
I'm not moving too far. I'm still participating. PBI is, in my blood.
Great.
I'm doing something as a providing a consulting service that's built on the work that PBI is starting to help these these elected officials get down to the nitty gritty of how do you make a public bank.
Great.
PBI has a much bigger educational agenda, but ultimately it has to get down to how do you help these people get the job done. So that's what Public Banking Associates is focusing on, but we're all in the same thing.
And is there a contact information for Public Banking Associates? Do you have a website now?
Yeah, publicbankingassociates.com.
Okay, great. And Ellen, then how about you? Are you back on the board of PBI?
Yeah, I'm chairman again.
Nice.
For the second time. So, and the website is publicbankinginstitute.org. And we're working on improving the website, among other things, to make it more user-friendly. We've had problems with Nation Builder, which is very difficult to work with. Anyway, so our current push is media and just getting the word out there. We're hiring a couple of new people that's their specialty. So we're hoping what we want to do is raise consciousness, bring everybody to, get the tribes together. One problem we've had for a long time is even among money reformers, they don't agree on the solutions. So you've got to go into those, we don't want to fight them. We just want to share information and come out with a mutually acceptable approach. So, but I think we're getting a lot closer to that where, anyway, so we need to educate and connect and basically sort of become one, spread the message.
Well, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think this is one of the key solutions to a better future for everyone really on the planet. If we can start to drive this idea home, I think it can make a huge difference in the daily lives of everyone. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I just want to tell my listeners, if you like what you're hearing, think about becoming a patron For The Shift, I could use all the help I can get. That's patreon.com/The Shift. If you want to join me on Facebook, that's The Shift with Doug McKenty on Facebook. Join the conversation on Twitter @DMcKenty, and find all my archives and more information about what's going on here at theshiftnow.com. Thank you so much, Ellen Brown, for being on the program. And Walt McRee, it was great to talk to you guys again today, and I hope all the best in the future. And hopefully I'll actually have a chance to see you when you're up here at the end of the month.
Hopefully.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Thank
Great.
you.
See you again. Take care.
You bet. You too. Take care.